Ah, nice. My element. Nighttime. 8:24 at the Geek House. You can tell that it's not a work night because I'm actually staying up late like a proper grown-up. So we've got a few things to talk about. Might still be some noise in the neighborhood because the weather's beautiful. So there's people with motorcycles and loud cars. And overall, you know, unless the cops get involved, a lot of people in this town get very, very night shifty when it's the weekend. Plus, I wonder if there's some community stuff going on and whatnot. And what does this sound like? It's been a while since I shifty. Bada bing. Good, we're in business here. And hey, look, a little stuffed cat there. Been digging around Amazon. For oh, look at the little kitty. I've been digging around Amazon for stuff for little decorations like this. Plus, if Review Tech USA can have chickens in his setup, please, I hope a couple of tuxedo cats aren't too big of an issue. What is up, everybody? This is Jay, aka Multimedia Jay. It's Friday night. Thank freaking goodness. Another wild week is over with, and I'm actually have some energy for a change. One of the you've been seeing a lot in my community page for Forza. That's because pretty much I make what I'm doing now into a workout to warm up, to either get used to it or warm up for something harder. So, oh, hi, Stream Elements. Nice to see you running. So, I basically have been coming home, and it's been a fight to stay awake. Sometimes I take a nap, play some games, and then, and then go back to sleep and get the rest of the sleep. I understand back in the 1800s, people used to sleep in 2 phases, where they'd get up in the middle of the night and, read a book by candlelight and then go back to sleep. So, for some reason, I guess a full 8 hours sleep is a very modern invention. Never really understood why, but sometimes I do better one way, sometimes I do better the other way. Sometimes you feel like a nut, and sometimes you don't. You know how life goes. Plus, getting old sucks. Either way. And that's all that's left of the pneumonia, by the way. Whoo! So, yeah, there's some annoying coughs and stuff. I knew a guy couple of back on night shift who had asthma, who was always coughing and had an inhaler with him everywhere he went. It's like, that's gotta suck. There's one form of asthma that makes you cough all the time, and that's it. Somebody should have the inhaler just so you can actually breathe normally for 20 minutes. Whatever. This isn't an old guy complaining about health problems stream here. We got to talk about the AMD Ryzen and the whole computer situation, because the monolith dilemma has absolutely come back for the 2020s. Because why is it that these hardware manufacturers can't make anything exciting? Everything has to have its freaking drawbacks. Let's look at processors. You have Intel, who got caught AMD style with inferior technology to make processors. Just like when AMD had the 9590, the 200-watt power guzzler of a CPU. Oh, boy, does that not seem so bad now with what Intel CPUs are doing. No. And graphics cards and everything. Power supply manufacturers go ballistic trying to engineer stuff whose short circuit protection won't shut your whole computer down when you fire up a game or things get too intense. Because graphics and now processors are going in the direction of transient surges and other microbursts of power that could potentially trip the fault protection in your power supply. It's supposed to be a safety feature to keep your computer from destroying itself and shut the whole system down. What happened? So Intel, they get caught with inferior technology. They have to make processors that run hot. They can be faster still, but they run hotter, and they're not even square anymore. So now we got to wonder about the laws of physics. Anybody with a background in electronics and electron physics and stuff should be able to tell you things that heat up and cool down. That's the heat and cool cycle is the enemy of many, many, many kinds of electronics. Yeah. And it's the same thing, too, with engineering for things like bridges and stuff. So there's those little cracks in the bridges in case the metal expands so it doesn't destroy the bridge when it gets hot out. So the stuff heats up and cools down. And you can get electrical wear and tear, and you can get mechanical wear and tear from stuff that's heating up and, cooling down just because of the changes in the metal. Now, we found out very early on with the Alder Lake processors that Intel, that they're flexing a little when they heat up. So, hey, we got an IT major in here. Computer information systems guy myself. I'm on the business end of things. So, there's a guy, there's a processor issue right now where, there's the thermals are being affected by the thing bending itself. And there's third-party solutions like little brackets, like with plates you can bolt down to try and make better contact with your processor. But I just don't like the fact that Intel processors bow like that now that they've gone rectangular. So, we have Sandy Bridge and Ivy Bridge that have doggedly stuck around for decades at this point. You can still get a refurb system with old Intel processor that's not going to support Windows 11 properly for peanuts. And but processors have been square for decades, and now we have a rectangular processor. And the minute Intel comes out with Alder Lake, they it's warping. Oh boy, really? So what's going to happen after many power cycles and stuff? We're worried about thermals right now, or maybe degrading thermals. I'm wondering if the whole thing might warp itself, and it might be like a smaller version of what happened to the original version of the Xbox 360. Remember when the motherboards? Remember when the motherboards, in those 360s were bending and warping from the heat, and it killed 360s with the red ring of death? That's the first thing I thought of when I found out that today's Intel processors flex like that. And it's because they're rectangular. But fortunately, Intel finally is getting some 3 nanometer type stuff coming up. It's just, Intel's finally playing a little catch up with their manufacturing stuff. They're getting some 3 nanometer stuff. And maybe finally now, will they go back to square processors once they have better technology? That's my question. Then on the flip side, you have AMD still trying to be brutish about trying to challenge Intel's dominance, and often wasting energy, putting too much effort into the wrong things. Like, instead of just making better stuff, they constantly do this Neanderthal marketing, and they brainwash people almost to the point where AMD is practically a religion these days. Now, I remember when the Athlon came out. If you see my tech videos over there, I got on a stand over there, an old Athlon processor from the days when processors came in stuff that looked like gaming cartridges, because the cache memory wasn't included. It was separate back then. Until it was integrated into the die. Intel and AMD found out the hard way. They were buying from the same vendors. So, make these little cartridge processors for the Pentium 3s and AMD Athlons. So, one of the top level cache or something that was separate from the processor. But the thing is, it's just, I still have one of those processors way the heck back over there. The AMD Athlon didn't become what it was because of AMD marketing hype. It became what it was because it outshined the Pentium 3s of the day. And then Intel stumbled when Pentium 4s were a little slower than Pentium 3s at certain mathematical calculations. Eventually, when they hit 2 gigahertz, Pentium 4 took over until they got too hot. That's when you see the development of the Intel TAC variant of the ATX specification was introduced direct side cooling for the first time in the 2000s, because processors were running so hot that we had to just bring fresh air in from the side to cool the darn things down. But and of course later in the decade there was the whole space heater computer thing. I certainly had a space heater computer. Efficiency didn't really start becoming a thing until Core 2 Duo. And Intel took back the performance crown with the Core 2s, and they had it for many, many years. But even now, they still have it. It's just their performance comes at the cost of efficiency. So, these guys says, who's this, Horizons? Yeah. Community college is a decent IT job. Dad doesn't want me to work at Best Buy. The thing with IT is you better be prepared to travel, because IT opportunities are few and far between. Right after I graduated, everything went to India. So it's mostly hardware stuff. And we have the threat of AI now that's looking to possibly replace coding and stuff like that. And even if we didn't have AI, you can use software to generate things like SQL and then just tune it instead of having to type out the whole thing yourself. So it's just there's all kinds of cute ways to make stuff and then just tune it instead of having to sit there giving yourself carpal tunnel. But I think hardware is pretty good. We need someone to take care of the equipment and fix it when it breaks. So I've always preferred hardware on the IT side of things. Either way, I'm not any kind of fanboy or anything. I want Intel and AMD to prove their worth. So, I want AMD and Intel to prove their worth because we're seeing what happens when AMD gets lazy. We already saw what happened when Intel gets lazy. TikTok, the monotony of TikTok. Then, of course, there's a way too complicated SKU catalog of processors, including processors that were deliberately handicapped, so to speak, because Intel could. There's no serious competition, so they would sock you for money for the decent stuff, and then they would handicap the heck out of like non-K processors and stuff like that. That's some of the crap I put up with back when I built my Skylake system back in 2016. I had people, of course, in the YouTube comments, the internet peanut gallery never can just shut up and enjoy the videos. They always got to give you they got to pick you apart and give you their tiny little opinions on every tiny little issue that they think you're doing wrong, blah, 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 blah. Listening to a guy earlier, he said, look, if you're arguing on the internet, it probably means you don't have the stuff. So if you buy something, why don't you just enjoy it? Yeah, if you buy something, you just enjoy it instead of going on the internet and fighting about it. And I was like, that's a pretty good point there. But either way, when I built what I have right now, which runs great, except for a couple of cases where the CPU becomes a limiting factor nowadays, niche cases like streaming games with the settings turned up too high, as well as not supporting Windows 11 because it's Skylake. But when I built this system, I got a whole bunch of crap from people in YouTube comments and other internet peanut galleries and whatnot, because I bought a K processor and put it on a B motherboard. So I bought a K processor and put it on a motherboard that didn't have overclocking support. And I'm like, these people are randos. These people were randos that have no clue what I've been through with computers in the last 10 years. Anyways, so one of the reasons why my Phenom 2 1090T system flaked out and killed its motherboard was overclocking. I was testing some overclocks on just for the heck of it, and it got to be too much for the motherboard, and the motherboard flaked out. So that ended that right there. So, but the thing is, overclocking does void warranties. So this is a current discussion with the 7800X3D about AMD and, people overclocking memory, whether they're going to support that. I think they should, given the way they market their stuff. But it is technically true that companies can tell you to screw yourself because you overclocked. And furthermore, when you overclock, you are subjecting yourself to the silicon lottery and other stuff as well in terms of results may vary. So overclocking is just, hey, maybe you'll get lucky, maybe you won't. So nothing, as far as I'm concerned, replaces a product that is good out of the box, that you don't have to overclock to death in order for it to be decent. Like the AMD processors in the last decade. How many times with the 8350 Sabertooth, blah, blah, blah. How many freaking times did I hear people on YouTube say, AMD overclocked is better than Intel's stock clock? Really? Oh, okay. So the thing doesn't hold its own on its own. You have to mess with it in order for it to be competent. Congratulations. But anyways, putting two and two together to finish up my little thought earlier about the whole motherboard thing. I put a K CPU in a B motherboard because the 6700 regular was 3.4 gigahertz, the K was 4 gigahertz. And there was only a $20 price difference. So yes, please, Intel, overclock my processor, technically, by 600 megahertz for $20. Thank you. But the problem is, especially with people arguing on the internet, is they can't get away from the same. They don't think for themselves, so they constantly have to stick to the same 6 or 7 talking points. They got to stick to the script. The minute you think for yourself and actually am somewhat intelligent, you shut them up very quickly because they don't have a response, because you're not falling for the bait. You're not falling for the internet argument trap where you spend all day screaming at each other on Reddit or whatever, and then at the end of the day you shut your computers off and you walk away believing whatever the hell you believed in the first place. So you just wasted all that time for nothing. Congratulations. What else could you have done with that time? Seriously now. Oh no, I only got burned by overclocks gone wrong, and there was a big speed difference between K and non-K processors. Yeah, of course I'll pay 20, and only a small money difference. Of course I'll pay $20 to essentially have Intel overclock my processor for me and have 4 gigahertz base speed. Thank you very much. Plus, the AMD Ryzen was taking too long. I was referring to it back then as the Duke Nukem Forever of processors. A reference to Duke Nukem Forever, a game that infamously took forever to come out, and people got sick of waiting for it. And when it came out, it was nothing special. Unless you're a Duke Nukem fan, like, hey, another Duke Nukem game. It's like, just the hype didn't match the finished product. And, of course... The AMD Ryzen did the same thing. I was skeptical when the Ryzen first launched, and I took a lot of crap on the internet because I dared to go against the prevailing non-wisdom of AMD's Neanderthal marketing fanboys who work for free, going around pretending that AMD is the greatest thing out there. Truth is, AMD is a company that can screw the consumers as much as anybody else. If you let their success get to their head, they will totally act like Intel did 10 years ago, 5 years ago even. They'll absolutely act like Intel if they're given the chance. These are companies we're talking about. They want to make money. They have a fiduciary duty to make money and return investments for their shareholders. They will screw you if they can. It doesn't matter who they are. Stop pretending one's an angel and one is the spawn of Satan. That's not the way business works. And we've seen this too. I agree with Linus. There's very few times I agree with Linus Tech Tips. I consider him to be a net negative for tech videos on YouTube because the Linus formula is kind of a thing, and he's had lots of problems with fanboys over the years. It was the Linus Tech Tips fan base that gave me a hard time about the whole Noctua fan thing years ago, when apparently you were a dumbass if you put anything in your system besides Noctua everything. That was, nearly 10 years ago when Shovel Knight came out? Seriously. Fanboyism is just so stupid. Either way, one of the few times I agree with Linus is that the 7950X was a slap in the face to AMD's consumers. So, okay, 7950X 3D, 7950X 3D versus 7800. So you have an initial launch of these 3D V-Cache chips that you need to park cores in order to get decent gaming performance out of because the controller might screw up. Or you just mix all the V-Cache together and eliminate that internal latency like what happened with the 7800X 3D. Oh, but if you bought one of the crappier chips and you want to get the 7800X 3D so you don't have to twiddle as much tinker, whatever as much in order to get your processor working well, then you have to reinstall the OS because there's some Windows Update-y drivery things that install in the background with the old processor that will screw over your 7800X 3D if you do that. Oh my goodness. What a world. It's just like, oh, let's release the product that costs more, but it has gotchas, and then release the better engineered, more consistent performing, less expensive processor later. And what? Then there's the whole thing with the Ryzen 7900 Hippie chip and the other Hippie chip non-X variants of the Ryzen 7000 series. Yeah, let's release the X variants first, take people's money, when the truth is, then we're going to release the lower power versions of them. The only real difference is one of them starts in turbo mode, you can go into eco mode. The other one's going to start in eco mode, you turn on turbo mode, and maybe there's a performance difference because of some engineering differences here and there. But by and large, you have turbo and eco mode on both types of processors unlike Intel, which handicaps their, non-X series, turns off overclocking or whatever, cuts cache memory, whatever nonsense Intel wants to pull. Oh, yeah. But let's sell the more expensive stuff first and then essentially have a stealth price cut in the hippie chips that come out later. Good job, AMD. You took people's money. It's like, this is turning into gaming all over again. Video games that get released beta on release. So you pay a higher price to buy a game and be one of the cool kids or whatever when the game has more bugs and you get a crappier experience, or you wait and it goes into it and the bugs get fixed. Sometimes months later, it goes to a Steam sale so you can buy it for less, or you wait even longer and get the Game of the Year edition that includes all the DLC. Like, talk about price skimming, which is a business term for you release stuff, it's more expensive, but it gets cheaper over time. So if you have some patience, or you're like me, you're perpetually behind on your video games, it's not a problem to keep playing the old games while everybody else is putting up with all the bugs and being the beta testers. So that already is a thing with video games. Have we really sunk to this level where this is how it works with processors? Same thing with graphics cards too. NVIDIA releasing the super awesome card that almost nobody wants because they don't have that kind of money. They want to get something more modest and maybe bang for buck-ish, like NVIDIA knows what that is these days. And then slowly, over the span of sometimes years at this point, the 80, the 70, the 60, the 50. Seriously. Yeah, what a thing to be doing when PC gaming is infamous for being too expensive. What a thing to be doing when we have the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, not the wimpy doodle Series S, the baby Xbox, but we have the mainstream consoles that do a little bit of 4K and 1080p 60. We have those actually in stock now. You can walk into Walmart and buy a PS5 now. Congratulations, gaming console companies, for finally actually having a supply chain. Whatever. So, we, in this day and age, of course, socking PC gamers for their freaking money is exactly the thing to do when inflation's going nuts. We have this other crap going on. Console gaming is the way it is. PC gaming is the way it is. And the millennials are fast, myself included, becoming the generation that has to learn the hard way that certain things in life that are very silently becoming luxuries. Like owning a home, having kids, having a decent car. Oh yeah, have you not noticed? The cost of buying a car these days, the basic thing you need so you can have a job, and be an independent adult. Shoom! The basics over and over and over. Or how about having a kid, something you want to, how many parents have I known in my generation who've bankrupted themselves just trying to have one kid and raise one kid? Not like the big families of before. One kid wrecks their entire young adult life because of all the costs involved. Like, owning a home silently became a luxury. Having kids silently became a luxury. Having a decent car silently became a luxury. We don't need that to happen with PC games. We don't need to have that. We don't need that to happen with PC gaming. And for Pete's sake, how about we start being smart enough to acknowledge that 1080p doesn't suck. It's just mature and it's old and it's basic nowadays. But it's perfectly fine versus playing in like 720 or 480 or something. You got a 40-inch 1080p screen like what I have. Everything's decent size, decent quality, and if you play a game like Forza Horizon 5, the graphics look pretty good despite being 1080p. And it is much more power efficient than chasing 4K. Which is fast turning into an overrated mix of 4K via upscaling like DLSS and native 4K, which is what I'm really looking for. I want to be able to max out games at native 4K, but what would that mean in terms of technology and a power draw leap and slamming the hell out of my computer in order to do that and nerfing the multitasking capability in a day and age where we're usually playing games while doing something else, or we have Discord open or listening to a stream or playing some music because we turn off the in-game music and we turn on Spotify or whatever. It's like gaming is changing, man. the way we thought about PC gaming 5 years ago doesn't really apply as much as it used to. And that makes me wonder about the X3D processors that AMD is putting out right now. Sometimes I think that with 5800 X3D, and now I'll ignore the crappy X3Ds that AMD sucked people's money with. The 5800 X3D and the 7800 X3D. Some of it reminds me of buying a console. Like AMD's trying to get people to buy essentially console APUs in PC gaming processor form. Because you look at these X3D chips, at PC, I think it was PC Mag that had a skeptical article about this thing, saying it was a very lousy mainstream sell, because in order to get that 3D V cache, some standard elements of PC enthusiast stuff, like the ability to overclock and other stuff, had to be nerfed pretty badly, because you have thermal issues with V cache. And also, the clocks will be slower on a X3D versus its regular counterpart in the Ryzen lineup, which nerfs some of the non-gaming stuff that you can do. And in some cases, substantially nerfs it with some tests that have been going on. So it's one of those things where 3D, yeah, it sounds cool, but it sounds more like the sort of thing that would be in a console than a multi-purpose computer that people, especially nowadays, people streaming and making YouTube videos and stuff like that, more heavy-duty mathematical stuff. It's not a bad thing to have a multi-purpose system. So, but what a world we live in, you know? Intel is mostly the performance king. Sometimes AMD, embarrasses Intel, but that's rare. Usually they're in the ballpark of Intel's performance, but Intel got caught with crappier technology. So they have, what do we have for lifetime here? Oh, we're actually dropping frames. Is that because of the network, or did I have something lock up on me? Let me see some stats here. But yeah, let's see. Oh, network. Interesting. I'll have to see where that is. Been a while since we had some of that. Maybe I should have restarted the modem first. I don't care. Once I get more settled in after building this computer, I'm going to look into getting fiber anyways, now that we have it in this hillbilly town of ours. So, Frontier Fiber has been building out in the area, and they're screwing up the traffic, too. I think there's one place in town around here where the fiber is going in front of the traffic sensor and screwing up one of the traffic lights. So the town's probably going to get on their case about that. So I'm going to give it some time for them to build it out and see if they have to adjust anything. But anyways. The AMD Ryzen is something I've been skeptical about, because I wanted AMD to prove themselves. There are some Ryzen chips that I'm kind of interested in checking out, but I'm not one of these people that thinks that Ryzen is always better than Intel, even with Intel being handicapped on manufacturing technology right now. Because the Core i5 in the 13th gen, now it's actually pretty decent power-wise for what it delivers for gaming performance. There's still like the Anakin Skywalker flame, whatever it is. There's a meme going around on the internet about Intel CPUs drawing 300 watts and burning themselves up, using the scenes from Revenge of the Sith, the fight on the lava planet. It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground. You underestimate my power. Yeah, those memes are going around about Intel CPUs right now. But that's, a lot of people, the 13900K, the 139. Yeah, well, the Core i5 is actually pretty decent nowadays. I think a lot of the problems with Intel is that people automatically think Core i3s are crap, and they automatically think Core i5s are just so-so, because they're the mid-range processor. There's some important power efficiency differences, though, with the i5s versus the i7s and i9s nowadays. The Core i5 is not a crap processor anymore like it was back when there was no multi-threading. That's another thing I got made fun of for. Oh, you got an i7, and what are you doing? You only need 4 cores to game. Just get an i5. Why are you spending money on an i7? Because the Ryzen's coming out, and it's going to bring multi-core stuff into fashion. The PC gaming is going to go into more Xeon-like direction. And indeed, the AMD Ryzen, especially in its earlier years, was the Xeon. of its day. It was a Xeon, essentially. More cores, less power per core. You know the people with their Xeon gaming PCs where, I got an Intel Xeon workstation. The processor's like $25. Look at this cheap workstation I got with an Intel Xeon. Can I get it to play games? Yes, you can, but it's going to be not as good as a core processor in either speed or efficiency because it was made for 24/7 operation of workstations or servers or whatever. So, more cores, less power per core. You know, like what AMD did with the FX series chips. Hey, look, we have an 8-core processor. And then quad-core Intels or hyper-threading Intels were better in the Sandy Bridge days. And more efficient at the same time. Now, Intel Core has been pretty good for itself. It's only very, very recently, particularly with Alder Lake and all this rectangular processor crap, that Intel's been in trouble because they just didn't have the technology. Well, it looks like they're finally getting some decent technology up their sleeve. So we'll see what happens with probably in a year or two. I was joking earlier about, oh, AMD's going to be like, we're 1 nanometer. Intel is 2 nanometers. Buy our stuff, lol. So, all right. Let's start with some basics here. Processor requirements for Windows, well, just for to think about as we go through all this. Is processor requirements for Windows 11. For, let's see, you need at least a 2nd gen Ryzen, and you need at least an 8000 series Intel Core. All right, let's close this out. I got some power consumption stuff for the 7800X3D to use as a power hierarchy for this type of stuff. But let's start with a little bit of user benchmark. To go through the history of my skepticism towards AMD and the Ryzen series, I got a whole lot of crap. Here's what I'm going to do. I did some radio style podcasts back in like 2017 or so. I'm going to make a supercut, like a big long podcasty thing of everything I said about the Ryzen last go round when I was building Monolith. You know, when I was skeptical of the AMD Ryzen when it first came out. I'm going to make a supercut, including the stuff that I took down because I got sick of all the people crying in the comments. So I'm going to have like literally everything I said, warts and all. I do go off on tangents like I do in these streams, but I'm going to have everything I said, warts and all, in a big long thing to listen to, just for archival purposes. So one of my many projects to do over the next couple of days, along with some other tech stuff I got to wrap up before we conclude the season of the wacky world of Multimedia J. So I got to emphasize these numbers have been rebalanced to take today's processors into account. So the Skylake is only 80s and 60s now. Used to be higher. So user benchmark gets a lot of criticism because of there's an editorial commentary writer who writes the so-called reviews of the processors that's a total Intel fanboy and bashes AMD every chance they get. And they make it look like it came from like a magazine article or something, but it reads more like an Ann Coulter book or some of, you know, one of those like contrarian authors who tries to make people mad in order to get people to read their stuff. One of those deals. Yeah, there's also some of them on talk radio as well. But I really don't care about the hot-headed opinions of people who write, what do we have in here? People who write stuff like this. Let me see here. Well, here's the thing. When the Ryzen 1700 came out, they were actually hopeful, and they said nice things about AMD back then. Let's see here. Comparing Intel's $1,000 6900K and the 700X shows that AMD delivers comparable performance for half the price. A shakeup of the CPU market will unfold as Zen rolls out. If Ryzen CPUs can overclock to 4.6 plus gigahertz, they will likely dominate the entire market, putting a very welcome end to monotonous tick-tock of recent years. This is when these people were actually nice about Ryzen chips. They've gotten very, very nasty in more recent years. But I don't care. This is just somebody's opinion. Opinions are not facts. They can be based on the facts, but fundamentally, I'm reading somebody's opinion here. I'm not looking for people's opinions. Anybody can tell me my opinion. I can type two things into YouTube and get opinions. I want data. I want facts. I want numbers. And so that's what we're going to look at here. Why have I been skeptical of AMD Ryzen? Because for the most part, it's been pretty overrated. AMD is incredible at marketing. Kind of reminds me of Twitch, actually. Twitch versus YouTube. People think the two are in any way similar when they're not. And Twitch is, as a streaming site, is very good at making itself look bigger than it actually is, and more important than it actually is. I no longer stream on Twitch. I just watch stuff there. I've got the Twitch affiliate and stopped because I don't want to be lumped in with all these emotional windbag itty-bitty Twitch streamers that think that starting fights on the internet is going to somehow make people want to watch them that aren't toxic douchebags. But anyways, let's go through the history of Ryzen, and let's look at the use douchebag. What is this? The 90s? Yeah, showing my age. Zoomers might not even understand that that was an insult back then. It's like calling someone a dumbass or making a reference to Beavis and Butthead or any Mike Judge comedy from back then, or Jerry Springer, rest in peace. Anyways, so let's take a look at some numbers here with regard to... So, when the Ryzen series came out, and I was getting bashed on the internet for it, people in the comments were like, friggin' Intel fanboy, or some stupid, I can't remember what it was. I deleted those comments a long time ago, because I was more jumpy back then, and less really, I was more jumpy, and I was tended to take people way more seriously than I should have back then. Either way, it was an 816 versus a 48 back in those days. I thought the Ryzen was going to be like another Xeon. More cores, less power per core. And Intel Core processors would maintain dominance in gaming and other specific applications that are better with more powerful cores than simply more cores. Now, here's the thing. This does not represent any kind of change from the predecessors to the Ryzen. It wasn't uncommon for AMD FX or Phenom chips to have more cores, but they were less powerful per core. So this whole paradigm, or this whole showdown between more powerful cores versus more cores, predates when Ryzen launched. And so this didn't represent any real change. As we went from Skylake into Skylake, which is what I had and what I chose when the Ryzen took too long to come out, and the 1700X, which is what I would have gotten if I had built a Ryzen system in the middle of the last decade. Let's look at the effective speed here. Now you've got data from running the user benchmark program. If it's biased, whatever. There's definitely some activity going on with nowadays with the Ryzens looking a little bit better than Intel in some ways. Mostly whole package TECO things like power efficiency with a decent amount of performance versus 300 watts if you slam the heck out of the 13900K. That's only if you peak every workload on a core or do something like old folding at home or something. I'm more curious about the real world numbers. Anyways, the reason why I care about power efficiency, by the way, for those that don't know, the desktop computer is up against mobile devices like laptops and smartphones, all of which can do basic computing stuff at extremely low watts, even net tops. Corporate America loves net tops because of the lower contribution to overhead. So you'll see net tops everywhere in corporate America. They've replaced desktops because they will have like a U-series Intel processor, some low-power processor that gives you enough punch to run a desktop and Excel and stuff like that, but like 5 to 10 watts draw from the wall because it's the low-power variant. It doesn't run hot either, so it doesn't need as much cooling. Some of these devices even have passive cooling because they run so cool. But they run Windows, and you can do businessy stuff on it, like check your email, open Excel, maybe even run a few queries in Power Query, or Power BI. So, and when you have a whole bunch of stuff contributing to your overhead that's used for basic stuff, you want to buy what's appropriate to the use scenario. One of the many ways corporate IT is very different from consumer IT. You don't need to have gaming PCs everywhere in a corporate environment. In fact, it's bad for your business if you do. You're wasting money. Either way, here's the initial showdown. 6700K, my processor, now long in the tooth, doesn't even compete with some Core i3s out there nowadays, versus the 1700X, which had more cores, the original Zen. And as much as our buddy over here at PC, at User Benchmark, was comparing to the Core i9, I only really cared about the i7 because the i9 was always the overpriced enthusiast chip for the person who wanted to have the bragging rights. So we start out, effective speed 14% difference, 80s and 60s versus 70s and 60s. We get down, and let's just cycle through the last several years of Ryzen. So single core point scores here, and I can get benchmark scores from other places as well. We're just going to do user benchmark tonight. So Intel, and don't forget, this is older. Really, the competitor at the time, what was the competitor at the time? Kaby Lake? 7700K. We're talking about 2017 processors. Yeah, about Kaby Lake, actually. Let's go to Kaby Lake. Kaby Lake, though, wasn't all that exciting, as in it was still freaking TikTok crap. Unfortunately, this is the highest processor my motherboard supports, and it just wasn't exciting versus Skylake. Just some boring Intel crap. That was the reason why people were cheering AMD on to kick Intel's ass and make them compete again, which they eventually did. But let's go back to the 6700K for giggles, because that's my processor that I've been running into the ground since 2016. It actually came out in 2015. Interesting. Skylake, baby. What a cool name, too, after all of those bridge processors. Skylake makes you think of, like, well, a lake with a big blue sky or whatever. Skylake. Anyways, still a cool name. I don't care how old the processor is. Let's go to our single core scores here. So, AMD, amazing, gonna kick Intel's ass. For the most part, AMD did not kick Intel's ass. So, Skylake versus first-gen Ryzen. Single core, Intel. 2-core, Intel. 4-core, Intel. Quad-core, Intel. Only an 8-core, because of the architecture, do we see Ryzen pull ahead. So again, we have a Xeon on our hands. More cores, so whatever benefits from more cores, what was there back then? Whatever benefits from more cores in general will do better than stuff that, you know, is better for more powerful cores. It took a while for games to be reprogrammed to scale with your hardware, but the thing is, what Ryzen has done with getting Intel to actually make something besides quad cores, what Ryzen has done is a big part of the reason why I decided to go with an i7 instead of an i5 in a day and age where gaming PCs are always quad core, as people would say on the internet back then. Yeah, I wanted the hyper-threading because I knew that AMD Ryzen was going to push things in the direction of more threads and more cores, and your architecture was going to start mattering big time. And hey, I was right. Skeptical about the Ryzen, which I was also right about, as we're seeing already in the numbers. But hey, I was right. Now, let's actually do apples to apples, like we said earlier. Let's go to the 7700K. 7700K, so we can have two processors from 2017 here, just for the heck of it. Who wins? And you can overclock, and yeah, you can. Well, actually, let's go back. Let's go back a second here. Let's go to the overclock numbers from the stuff, the overclocks people are getting on PC. On a PC benchmark. This is a K processor after all. Who wins? Intel, 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 and finally AMD wins again with multi-core. But I'm not going to look as much at the overclocked stuff because that's silicon lottery, that's results may vary. I want to know before you start playing and tinkering, for the most part, what do you get? All right, so 6700K, go forward, 7700K. Let's look at two 2017 processors. So do apples to apples. This is when Ryzen came out. Hey, something from Mike. My biggest regret of the past 10 years or so was building a desktop with the Phenom 2 1100T, thinking more cores is better. Replace it in 2017 with a quad core which mopped the floor. Yes. My original Tuxedo, well, not my original Tuxedo processor, but in 2010, when Final Fantasy XIV, the original terrible, unoptimized, horrendously bad version, basically the Hogwarts Legacy or Star Wars Jedi Survivor of 2010, when that game ran badly, I thought I needed a new computer, so I spent money building a 1090T system in the AMD Phenom in the AMD Phenom series. Little did I know that the 1090Ti was competing with the first generation Intel cores, which were not very power efficient. Starting with the Sandy Bridge, the power efficiency got a lot better, and that remained the trend until Intel fell behind on manufacturing. So if I had waited another year and built a Sandy Bridge system, well, one of the reasons why I have a Sandy Bridge Delosaurus is to answer that what if question. If I built a Sandy Bridge, how long would it have lasted? And you know what? If I really, really want to be nerdy, I can get a riser cable for PCI Express so I can use my RTX 2060 in the cards that are too big for the Delosaurus's case. I'll just run the system with the side panel off with the graphics card sitting on the desk outside of the computer. We'll get this working one way or another. I'll get one of those extension cables for PCI Express, and we'll plug it in that way, and we'll see what performance we get in games. So there's ways to do things today's day and age. Thanks for the comment, Mike, and thanks for the comment, Horizons, for stopping by. All right, so apples to apples, I'm going to compare the Skylake more so than the Skylake, but let's see here. You could have them around 2600K for 10 years, upgrading only the GPU. Yeah. I got a 6700K, and only now in very niche situations, like streaming a game with the settings too high, or Forza Horizon 5, which is made for the Series X in 4K, so of course it's going to pound the processor with flipping assets back and forth, plus it uses a lot of VRAM. So, yeah, I mean, other than that's the only thing I'm running into in terms of CPU limitations. So, all you need is a Core i5. Yeah, who's laughing now? Dumbasses. All right. Single core, who wins? The Skylake. Dual core, the Skylake. 4-core Skylake. And AMD wins by less than 100 points. Overclocked, same thing. Skylake, and then finally AMD wins if you had software that's scaled with your number of cores. You would do better with these early Ryzens. Now let's see, how long did it take the AMD Ryzen to finally become more worth it, even the tiniest bit, than my 6700K from Monolith. 1700X. Let's go to second gen Ryzen, the 2700X. Let's see here. Single core Skylake. Remember, we're talking a 3-year difference in the processors. Single core Skylake still inches ahead. Dual core Skylake. Finally, with the second gen Ryzen, we get better quad core performance. So this is when the Ryzen 7 out Intel'd Intel, and of course we always know that, yeah, of course, same deal with 8-core octa-core and stuff like that. See, we get similar numbers. Same thing pretty much happens with overclock. I'm just going to ignore the overclock numbers for now. It's just overclock, leave the silicon lottery out of it. There's people that will overclock to their heart's content, but I want to know what these things can do before you start playing with them. What you buy, how good is it? Plus, there's also factory overclocks to factor in as well. I often buy like factory overclocked graphics cards and things along those lines. All right, let's see here. Let's move forward to the third gen Ryzen. Third gen Ryzen, finally the overall performance inches ahead. So 2019, processors like my Skylake was like, my Skylake was like 4 years old by the time the third gen Ryzen, I think this is what Tyranny uses if I remember right. The third gen Ryzen, a couple of streamers I watch used Ryzen 7 3700Xs or 3900Xs. Now here's the Ryzen 7 third gen. How does it compete with Core i7? The 9 series in both of them is the enthusiast stuff, probably costs too much. Okay, finally, single core. It took third gen Ryzen before the single core finally would pull ahead. And finally, so it took 3 generations. All right, let's go back and let's see how Intel, let's back up. So, okay, now by the time third gen Ryzen comes out, I'm basically defeated. Now, if we go forward to, I'm finally defeated. Let's go forward to the hippie chip of the 7th generation. The hippie chip represents a 35% effective speed increase here. and good single core jump, good dual core jump, really good 4-core jump, ba-boom on scaling everything up, especially when overclocking gets involved. Remember, AMD processors are made to factory overclock, so you can turn on turbo mode, and depending on your cooling, it will jack up to a certain, like, degrees or something like that. It will jack up, it'll overclock itself as much as it can up to a certain temperature, like 90 to 95 degrees. I wonder if you can control that too. And so this is what I'm looking at if I wanted to go to the hippie chip of the Ryzen 7000 series. Remember, not much of a difference between the X's and the regulars nowadays. One starts in turbo mode and one starts in eco mode. So you just start in one mode or the other, and there might be like a small difference here and there if you ramp up a hippie chip versus the original release. So, but yeah, this is like years of this is where I'm at right now. Because I'm not really interested in Intel because of their rectangular processors. Until they get back to square processors, I'm probably going to see what I can do with AMD. So, but this is the hippie chip, the most appealing, more so than the 7800X 3D, by the way. Which, why don't we just do Ryzen versus Ryzen here? 7800X 3D, we might as well just get this out of the way here before we go back and look at the progression or lack thereof of this sort of stuff. So the problem with the X3D chips is they're like console processors because they're heavily limited due to the V-cache. The V-cache is great if you have high-end graphics cards to pair up with them. You look at, for example, YouTube channels like Testing Games and whatnot. YouTube channels that are doing, video game testing. Get past people's opinions and look at their hard numbers. The CPU showdowns always have a 4090 or a 3090 or whatever. So you're seeing the results with a top-of-the-line graphics card. Most people don't have that. Steam Hardware Survey. Most common graphics card right now, probably because of its VRAM, is the regular RTX 3060. Not the 3060 Ti, which I have, which has less VRAM, but more powerful guts, so to speak. But I'm playing in 1080p, so it won't matter as much. But it's the 3060 that's the most dominant graphics card out there. I'm sure there's like an RX 6000 series that is similar that people use on the Radeon side of things. I think Radeon will probably be a little bit, but next time I'm looking for a graphics card, I think Radeon will probably be more appealing by then. I don't entirely agree with Adored TV on that sort of thing. Let's see. Oh, I was just catching up on the chat here as well. But so the 7800X 3D, you see some lower scores. You see a couple of lower scores here, but workstation as in tons of workstation. So it's a niche product. If you have a powerful graphics card to pair it with, you'll get the incredible frame rates with all the eye candy turned on because of the high amounts of cache. But the cache is not all that different between these two. You're talking like 96 versus like 64 or whatever it is. Something, but I think it's the architecture of the cache that's different on the hippie chip. Well, let's see. Single core, the hippie chip wins. Dual core, the hippie chip wins. 4-core, the X3D wins, and then octa-core, the hippie chip wins. They have similar extreme efficiency too for power. So in terms of heat, not needing a super fancy cooling setup, and of course overclock, factory overclock is dependent with with your cooling and stuff along those lines. And here's how here's how the CPU Pro talks about the Ryzens nowadays. Look at this crap. It's just sponsored reviews with cherry-picked games that showcase the wins, ignore frame drops, and gloss over the losses. Watch out for AMD's army of Neanderthal social media accounts on Reddit, forums, and YouTube. They'll be singing their own praises as usual. AMD continue to develop advanced marketing relationships with select YouTubers in the hope of compensating for second-tier products at first-tier marketing. PC gamers considering a 7800X 3D need to work on their critical thinking skills. Influencers are paid handsomely to promote overpriced products. Rational gamers have little reason to look further than the Core i5 of the current generation, which offers comparable real-world gaming and better desktop performance at a fraction of the price. Workstation users may find value at higher core CPUs like the 3700K. As long as Intel continues to sample and sponsor marketers that are mostly funded by AMD, they will struggle to win market share. Now, This is so loaded. That's why I'm only looking at the numbers here. I really don't care about some hotheads' opinions here. But let's look at that Core i5 because it really is. I mean, Intel really is defining Core i5. Intel is really defining, that Core i5 isn't just like boring anymore. It's not like, not like a corporate workstation processor. So just zoom in on this, make it nice and big because these are small numbers, even though it's going to get fuzzy because it's going to get a little on the fuzzy side. But let's make the numbers. Here's the hierarchy for idle power consumption, and it goes also to slamming the processor and things like that. Let's look at the hippie chips here. Things are fuzzy even on my end. Whatever. Hey, here's the last APU at 64 watts when it's not doing anything exciting. So that's the Core i9 at 69. Where's the 13.6? 67 watts. I'm having a hard time reading this. So the Core i5 is actually the most balanced Intel processor of the current bunch. 67 watts at idle. Where's the Ryzen? Okay, the 7800X3D is highlighted at 75 watts. So the Core i5 actually ramps down thanks to its E-cores pretty well. If you go old school, it's like a 1 watt difference going back to the 5800X3D. Hey, where's the hippie chip? 78 watts, but don't forget the hippie chip Ryzen 9 has more cores than the X3D and etc. So now if we do a single threaded load, this is off of Guru 3D. I've been checking out their stuff for years now. Guru 3D originally started reviewing graphics cards, but now there's some other things in here as well. Ryzen 7 6800H, is that a laptop chip? I don't know. Let's see here. So the single threaded load, where's that core? So here's the 7800X3D at 110 watts when you're pounding like a core. 5800X3D is at 109. The Core i5 is 108. So if you don't get too many cores involved, the Core i5 actually holds its own, more so than the i7, the i9, the stuff that all the memes are all about. Let's keep on rolling here. Where's the 79? Look at all the thread rippers. Where's the 13900K? 124 watts when just one core is getting pounded. Where's the Ryzen? Where's the hippie chip? Where's my hippie chip here? I'm all, 7900. Oh, yeah, right next to the X3D at 111 watts. 1 watt. Woo! Now the fun part comes in when you slam all the cores. Now the performance cores are involved, and this is where we get the memes from. Go down to the bottom. Core i9 13900K 368 watts. Core i7 13700K 367. We wonder why power supplies are struggling so much when you're slamming everything. Of course, I don't know. It depends on what game you're playing, whether it gets pounded that much in terms of CPU. So it might be more of a thing you see when you're running Furmark or something. Here's the Core i5, though, at 223 watts when you're slamming everything. Not that bad until you scroll up to the top. You get down to 179 for the 7800X3D. Where's the 5800X3D? 211 watts, so I think so it's in the ballpark of the Core i5. Where's the hippie chip? 158 watts, pounding 12 cores, 24 threads. With the hippie chip of the Ryzen 7000 series. There you go. And why don't we compare, since they're right next to each other, the 12600 versus the 5800X3D. Let's go back to that. Let's compare the Core i5 versus 5800X3D. Let's go back here and let's do 5800X3. No, let's do Intel on the left. 13600K, no F please, versus 5800X3D. We know that for similar power, what exactly do you get from this? Oh, here we go. And this is why Intel has some diamonds mixed in with its current power suckers. So 5800X3D, by the way, is at 816 in terms of cores and threads versus 1420 Raptor Lake at 3.5 gigahertz here. And let's see here. Average score, the Intel wins. The Intel wins. And even an octa-core which the 5800X3D is an 8-core processor, the Intel wins. Overclocked. Does AMD at least win? No, they don't. Nothing. The Core i5 slams the 5800X3D at similar wattage, at a similar wattage envelope. So there you go. So it's just weird because, Core i5s were boring. That's like what your company would use in your corporate computers and stuff. It was always i7 and i9 that were for enthusiasts and gamers, but with Intel's current manufacturing woes, Core i5 is looking cool. I mean, if you want, like, the biggest competitor to a lot of what AMD has is this 13.6. But it does not compete with the hippie chips. It does not compete with the hippie chips at all. How about 13700K? Core i5 versus Core i7. 3% difference, but this one's going to suck more power. And then 13900K, 6% difference, but this one's going to suck a hell of a lot more power. And what do we have here? So finally, if you're sucking a ton of power, you pull a little bit ahead of... of course, 8-core, you do a little bit better because there's more cores in general. If you suck way more power, you can blow away the Core i5 versus the Core i7, 13700K. What do those numbers look like? Not that far behind. So, I mean, if you want to build Intel right now, this Core i5 is your best bet for best overall. As long as your rectangular processor doesn't have issues years down the road from all your power cycling if it warps itself too much. I still can't stop thinking Xbox 360 when it comes to, Raptor Lake and Alder Lake and all these rectangular processors. I'll definitely consider Intel again if they go back to square processors when their manufacturing catches up. All right, so that was fun. How does this compare with the 7800X3D, by the way? Of course, we know there's going to be V-cache, so if you have powerful graphics, this in your processor doesn't catch on fire. You'll do, all right, let's see here. So again, I mean, the Core i5 is a multi-purpose processor. It also costs less too, by the way. Look at these street prices. The 800X3 is finally at MSRP if you cannot buy it from a scalper. But 300 something for this? Look, I paid 300 something for my I paid 320 for my Skylake. So this is the functional equivalent of my Skylake on the Intel side. And I think motherboards might be less expensive because there might still be DDR4 support and things like that. So Intel, I mean, the thing with Intel is you got to pick around through their catalog to find what doesn't suck while they have crappy manufacturing. And I think the 13600K is probably the Intel processor that I like the most here. Yeah. So probably the one I would go to if I want to go Intel. But rectangular processors, I don't know. Let's see here. So versus the 7800X3D. Single core, the Intel wins. Dual core, Intel. Intel wins on everything. So, and the heat of this thing, of course, this is more power efficient. This is more power efficient as a hippie chip. But then the 7900, Ryzen 9 7900 is actually a little better at that. And it's more of an apples to apples comparison because you're not looking at those niche V-cache processors. And then even still, the i5 13600K, we know that this will run cooler. The hippie chip runs way cooler. So it's the 3600K, if you slam the hell out of it, will be more like a 5800X3D. But versus the hippie chip, it obviously loses on efficiency. But this is the way it is right now. Intel is more powerful. Intel has more performance. But it's like driving a muscle car as your daily driver versus driving a Prius. It's one of those. Let's see, single core. Intel wins on everything, but they come close when you get multi-core involved. As we're talking 14 cores for 20 threads, some of which are E cores, which are going to run slower, versus a 1224 here. So simpler chip, and also if your software has a bit of a problem with two different types of processor cores. and a processor that resembles a smartphone processor more than an old-fashioned PC processor with just some mathematical cores divvying up the workloads. Then maybe, Ryzen would be better at this case, but my favorite Intel processor is definitely, of Raptor Lake, is definitely this 13.6. You get the performance punch of Intel without 300 watts if you pound the hell out of everything. I wonder how it runs Hogwarts Legacy or Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Since apparently 2023 is the year of the System Slammer games. All right, let's go through the history. Let's go back to the 1700X, and let's go through the history year by year. So let's go to KB Lake. KB Lake versus its Ryzen counterpart from 2017. From 2017, the Intel wins. So Intel, AMD finally, when you have lots of cores. Like I said, the early Ryzens were just another freaking Xeon. More cores, less powerful cores. Nothing really changed. There's a lot of nice marketing, and the efficiency of these things were way better than like the 8350 and stuff. But the AMD Ryzen did not change very much in terms of AMD's strategy versus Intel, and Intel has constantly had the performance edge, even as Ryzen built itself up into what it is today. Let's find equivalent Intel versus the 2700X. Go second gen Ryzen. We're looking for a processor from 2018. Let's see. Was the 8700 close to 2018? Nope, that was 2017. But just for the hell of it, Core i7 Coffee Lake 8700K. By the way, minimum processor required, I believe, didn't we see that? Yeah, minimum processor required to run Windows 11. Let's see here. 88, 90, 80, 76. Coffee Lake. Intel start getting its ass in gear. 95 watt TDP versus 105 watts on the Ryzen 7 2700X. A 612 versus an 816. It even had an older manufacturing process, the beginning of Intel's woes with that crap. Yeah. Hey, where's the numbers? Oh, okay. Who wins? Intel, Intel on 8 cores with less cores. So yeah, architecture, yeah, but more powerful cores. If we overclock, AMD overclocked is better than Intel stock clock. Remember that from 10 years ago? Who wins? Intel. Finally, AMD, if you play around with overclocking. So now, instead of AMD winning on multi-core by default, AMD wins if you overclock. But don't forget, these processors are about half a year apart. Let's go to the 9700K. When did that come out? Not the 9700KF. 9700K. Coffee Lake Q4 2018. So these processors are closer together. These processors are closer together. Let's see what we have here. Lower TDP, 8.8 versus 8.16. So no multi-threading. Older manufacturing process. Clocks are similar, but more of a boost, more of a turbo on this one. What do we have? Who wins? No overclocks yet. Stock, out of the box. Intel. With less threads. With no hyper-threading. 8.8, not 8.16. Overclocking. Intel. So even overclocking wouldn't save AMD with this stuff. All right. Next one, the 10700. 10th gen Intel corresponds to 2020, the pandemic processor. 3700X, when did that come out? 2019. Let's go back up to Coffee Lake. Let's go back to Coffee Lake. And let's see here. So 9th gen still. What do we have for basic specs here? So Intel starting to lose their edge with energy efficiency with a higher TDP. An 8.8 versus an 8.16. Still getting beaten on manufacturing technology. Clocks are similar. What do we have for performance with Intel, having more powerful stuff per oomph? Who wins? Intel, barely. Intel, barely. Intel, with less threads. Overclocked. Intel. So, let's see here. 3700X. There wasn't a 4700 was APUs. So let's skip that. Let's go to the 5700X. A processor I've seen a lot of people do all kinds of cool stuff with. Q2 2022. This is a Ryzen last socket AM4 generation. The X3D will be based kind of on this technology, but this is the comprehensive processor. We know that the X3Ds are very niche. So, but still, Coffee Lake, 1% effective speed. Intel's starting to fall behind on manufacturing technology here. So let's take a look. 96.6, blah, 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 blah. No. Where's the basics on this? Do we not list that anymore? Yeah, it looks like it's missing here. We don't have like the basics like the TDP and other stuff. Oh wait, nice tabs? No, that's not it. That's actually bigger. I don't see any TDPs or anything. Screw it. 90s and 80s versus 90s. So let's see. Coffee Lake versus the 5700X. All right, who went? AMD. Finally, we got to move forward with Intel. So Coffee Lake, 2 years later, Ryzen finally catches up to Coffee Lake. AMD. When you overclock, Intel does not win. Ever. All right, let's move forward. 10th gen. Stop moving the 57 at the 5700X. 10th gen. What do we have? Let the games begin. Any info on the manufacturer? Well, Intel's falling behind on manufacturing at this point. So let's look at the scores out of the box. AMD. So this is that one golden moment with the what is this? 300X would probably be the better comparison. 5700X came out 2 years later. Oh yeah. Why don't we back it up? Here? Oh yeah, I forgot about that. 5700X with 96.2 versus the 5800X 98.2. Okay, we'll move up to that. All right, we'll move up to that. We'll keep it on the 57 by now. We'll bounce it over to the 5800 here. Let's see, 2020. But this is older stuff. This is older stuff versus the 5700X. 5800X. Let me see that. 5800X is Q4 2020. All right, let's do Q4 of 2020. Thanks, Logan. Let's back it up here. Let's see. External data, value and sentiment. Oh, we actually have some other TDPs as well here. All right, well, battle of the 2020 processors. How about we go back to Coffee Lake, see if it still kicks its ass. Like we did before. Yeah, I forgot the numbers went backwards for a while. Yeah, I forgot the numbers went backwards for a bit. Yeah, wasn't that like a stripped down? Yeah, okay. Wasn't the 5700X stripped down anyways? So yeah, this is really screwed with the numbers a bit. Yeah. 96, 98, 94, 98, 197. Yeah, stripped down, whatever. All right, let's go back to Coffee Lake versus 5800 then, since the 5800X 3D was based on this tech anyways. And just where we get some more of the data that I'm looking for here. So the Intel ahead on watts despite older technology. Kidding me for TDPs? An 8.8 versus an 8.16, older manufacturing tech. Similar watt ranges. What do we have here for the names? With Coffee Lake? Who wins? AMD. Oh, told you. Oh, well, there you go, Logan. We checked it. So I mean, the 5th gen AMD Ryzen is really the golden moment for Ryzen here. It's 5900X. Oh wait, that's the Ryzen 9. We're mostly looking at 7s here. The 9s were always the enthusiasts. We're looking at like semi-enthusiasts with this other stuff. So that means, of course, the concurrent counter on YouTube is broken as usual. Okay. Let's see here. 5800X, leave that on there. All right, so this is the showdown. All right, let's move forward to a 2020 processor here. Let's go to the 10700K. Comet Lake, 10700K, looking at 2020 processors now. 97, 97, 96 versus 98, 197. Better on desktop-y type stuff. Is there some... Okay, so let's see here. This is where the manufacturing starts to screw up. Higher TDP, and they're both 816s, but Intel has the older technology. Intel has the older technology, but they turbo up faster with older tech. So heat. Here we go with the heat already. Actually, why don't we... Where was the 10700K? Nope. There it is. X3D processor. There it is. All right. The 10700K. Where did that stack on these power thingies? So let's see. Where is... Well, the 7800X3D is close to the hippie chip 7900. 75, we know the 12600's pretty decent. All right, 10700K is actually right next door to the 7800X. So 74 watts idle. Where's the hippie chip? 75, so it's in the ballpark with the hippie chip. All right, 10700K. When you slam a single core, it goes to 10700, 116 watts. So it's ahead of the 7800X3D. 7800X3D. And maxed out. 10700K, 248 watts. Yeah, there we go. 248 watts versus, here's the Core i5 at 223. So it's in the ballpark with the Core i5. So if we switch this out with the 12600K, the i5 that I really like, what are we looking at? Oh, well, the i5 still represents an improvement over it. Who wins? The i5, da-da-da-da-da. Of course, 816 versus 1016 with this sort of thing. Let's go back to Ryzen here. Yeah, pretty decent. I still think the i5 that's out right now is probably the sweet spot of the Intel lineup. So 10700K versus the 5800X. 816, older technology. Who wins before we overclocking? AMD. Let's move forward. 11700K. This is where Intel was mostly in their doldrums. They're still in the doldrums at manufacturing, but not with performance. 11th gen i7 versus the 5800X. Any specialties here? Let's see. Higher TDP, 816s, older manufacturing tech, higher turbos. So, cook that Intel, baby. 101, 102, 98, 101, 97. Who wins with this one? AMD. Intel on 8-core. When you overclock, who wins? AMD. Intel. Well, that's weird, but hey, you know. All right, how about 12th gen? 700K. The i7 from the 12th gen. The descendant of my Skylake here. Descendant of my Skylake. Who wins? Intel. With what specifications? Higher TDP, 1220 versus 816, 10 nanometer versus 7 nanometer, 3.6, 3.8, 5 gigahertz, so for Alder Lake. So this is really the beginning of the rectangular processors that I'm nervous about the long-term longevity of. It was the 1100K Rocket Lake. Sounds almost like Rocket League. That was the last hurrah before things went over. So this is the best we can do. How would it compare to the hippie chip? Ryzen 9 7900 from today. Okay, pulls ahead a little. Who wins? AMD. Yeah. Yeah, I forgot that the numbers went backwards because AMD released like a stripped down version of 5800X. Been a while. So we compare all of that. All right, so 11700K. But see, this is the thing. Intel is doing more with crappier stuff here. Yeah, this is just the Core i7. 12th gen i7. Finally, versus the 5800X. Standard cores here. What do you have? 125 watts versus 105 watts. 1220 versus 816. Older manufacturing, competitive frequency range. This is where Intel starts to settle into the pattern they're known for today. They don't have very good manufacturing, but they have performance, but they don't have efficiency compared to AMD. So in terms of the costs, in terms of the heat, in terms of how loud your system gets when you play games, that sort of thing. Let's see here. Standard out of the box. Who wins? Intel. Overclocked. Intel. I think we have to move forward here. But this is also where things start getting hot, especially with the top of the lineup nowadays with Raptor Lake. So we'll move forward to the 7th gen Ryzens here, which is basically what we have today. 222, 443, 885, 1661. So Intel. Okay, let's move forward. Not even going to touch that X3D because it sucks. Thanks, AMD. Let's see here. Still cheaper, though, by the way. But Intel's going to be forced into cheaper chips if they're not selling. So let's see here. Standard for 13700K. This one gets hot. This one's going to get hot trying to keep up. So if you don't mind a little slow cooker there, then, yeah, you can, right. So this is where we're at today. Intel currently has crappier manufacturing technology, and so that causes things to run hotter. And they have to do gimmicks, and they have to do multiple types of things. But also, look at AMD. Look at AMD here with 170 watt TDP. This is the Ryzen 9 set. Oh yeah, we're not even comparing apples to apples. Even when I switched over to the Ryzen 9, because I've seen this stuff here, let's go to 7700X. I don't even pay attention to the Ryzen 7s. How about, what's 7900? That's a 9? Yeah, that's a 9. 7700. An 816 versus a 1624. Versus a 1624. 5 nanometer manufacturing. Who wins? Intel on everything. But that's basically what we have right now. Is it AMD wins on efficiency, Intel wins on performance. Intel wins on performance, AMD wins on efficiency. And except for if you buy like something super niche like the 7800X3D. That's the world we live in. I mean, even workstation stuff here. It's almost like server processors and stuff. But I really don't like the space heater processor, so we're going to back off down to the Core i5. But even still, what do we have for numbers? The Core i5 is what I would get. Okay, now AMD is winning. That's what it took. So, if you buy Intel's answer to the Ryzen in terms of not burning itself up as much, well, maybe not the 7000X3D with the little issues they've been having lately, but if you go with Intel's most well-balanced option, you will fall behind AMD. You're going to fall behind AMD. Unless we did square off against the hippie chip. But let's do 79. Well, no, the 7900 is more powerful as a comprehensive processor than the 7800X3D. But that's the thing. You see what's happened here? Intel has barely lost on performance. The internet loves to say that AMD Ryzen revolutionized the world. I was skeptical of Ryzen, and now here we are. So let me load up some things here. Give me a Firefox window. And let me get YouTube, but mute the sound so we don't get any game audio here We're going to go to the Testing Games channel. Testing Games. Let me load up the Testing Games channel on here. Testing Games is one of my favorite. Oh, Linus is doing the WAN show. Maybe I shouldn't do this stuff. Browser mode. Link it up to Firefox. I highly recommend you subscribe to Testing Games and similar channels. There's a couple similar channels out there. It's basically just squaring off various forms of hardware against each other. What involves that Core i5 here? What are we looking at? 12600K versus 13. Can I do like 12600K? All right, 12600K versus the Ryzen 5 5600X. Oh, why don't we do the Ryzen 126? I'm looking for Ryzen 7 5th gen versus. All right, let's mute this. Mute this, and who is this? Oh, it's Best Buy. Interesting. All right. Let's see. Most replayed. Gee, is that the end of the ad? All right, what are they using for, what is Testing Games? What are they using here? I missed it. What's the resolution? What's the resolution? You know what? Let's do reaction mode for this. Let's do reaction mode for this. There we go. Keep it nice and clean. Keep it nice and clean so you don't see a 50 bazillion level 1 text in Gamers Nexus videos. So let's back it up. What exactly are they doing 1080p for this? Stop. Oh, it's not on here. Is it 1080p? Post-processing, I don't know what the resolution is. Usually they square off against it here. 180 versus 184. So you have that 12600K holds its own versus the old Ryzen 9 from the 5th gen. So that's cool. This is what that oh wait, I'm looking at the wrong processor too. That's 12th gen. I'm looking for 13600K. I want 13th gen here. No wonder I'm looking at old chips. 13 versus, give me a 13600K versus a Ryzen. Oh, okay. Oh, this is really cool because the Ryzen 5 7600 is one of the cheaper Ryzens. It's the cheapest Ryzen out there. The 7600X is actually, the Ryzen 7600X is actually, if you want to buy a socket AM5 motherboard and you want the cheapest chip out there, the current cheapest is the Ryzen 5. I haven't seen a Ryzen 3 yet for this new setup. All right, they are doing 1080p here. So, let's see what we have here. 148 versus 140. So, i5 versus Ryzen 5. i5 versus the Ryzen 5 here. Let me, let's go back to user benchmark. 13600K versus 7600X. What do we get for that? Let me go. What do we get for user benchmark numbers on here? All right. Core i5 13600K versus 7600X. Users versus brands on YouTube. 22 to 30. Yeah, see? Yeah, see that? Yeah, what do we have here? Standards. Intel wins on everything. Intel wins on everything with 1420 versus 612. Also, it's a 612. Okay. So it's like an old school i5 with the cores. But higher clocks. But higher clocks, though, for Raptor Lake. All right, let's see this. But it plays ball with the 7600X. Let's see here. Oh, Gamers Nexus likes that i5 too. Gee, I wonder. Yeah, it's probably the best Intel processor out of this bunch. Display metal posters? Oh, ads. Well, yeah, let's send some ad revenue their way. We're only looking at their stuff here for Testing Games. 221 versus 232. And what's the processor load here? 66% of the 13600 versus 80% of the 7600X. So the architecture is very much in play here. CPU power about within 10 watts of each other. Intel has the crappier manufacturing technology, so of course they're gonna, yeah, of course they're gonna have that kind of stuff going on. 13600K. What other 13600 comparisons do they have here? 7600. That's the Ryzen 5. 13900K. 900K. I can't find any more with that Core i5. Nope. All right. 13.7 is i7 Showdown versus R7 Showdown. And then there's 12th gen is DDR5. But, I mean, these benchmark channels are pretty good. These benchmark channels are pretty good for comparing things-ish. But, yeah, that Core i5, I think I got to check that out now, since I know that Steve did a review of the 12900 here. So it's good that it's pretty good that, you know, this sort of thing is a thing with that processor. But yeah, I was right about the AMD Ryzen. There's a ton of marketing behind the Ryzen. And actually very rarely has AMD actually won versus Intel. I mean, Intel, they've stagnated on their manufacturing technology. But when does Intel 3 come into play? So when does Intel catch up? When does, let's see, Intel's process roadmap, there was something more recent with that. There's something more recent with this. Oh, there's also an i3 as well. So, yeah, the cheapest processor you can probably get is an Intel i3. So if you're going to build the cheapest gaming PC possible, which why don't we kind of get embarrassed here? 6700K versus 13100. User benchmark, link back to Chrome. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Browser mode. Link up to Chrome. Core i3. When did the Core i3s... Core i3 12100, I think, is still around. 16% faster. They're both 4.8s. Alder Lake versus Skylake. And the i3 wins. This is why I'm looking at building a new computer. When you start getting beaten up by a Core i3, and when did this happen? 10th gen Core i3? How about 9th gen Core i3? Core i3 9100. Okay, finally. Probably around the 90... probably when No. When the Core i3 essentially was rebranded to no longer be complete crap. So when hyper-threading was added, Core i3 10300 was a 4.8 for Comet Lake. And that's when we saw, yeah, Comet Lake i3 beats my Skylake i7. So when Intel... Look at these comparisons. More energy efficient, too. Ugh. Just punch me in the face already. Hey, what do you know? When Intel decided to stop hamstringing their processors and not have the i3 be total crap anymore, it started out competing previous generation i7s. How many previous generation i7s? Probably not Coffee Lake. Nope. How about the 8th gens? No. Probably KB Lake. KB Lake, right? No, KB Lake even played ball with it. Started to fall behind with KB Lake. Yeah, the i3. Imagine that, you know, have a processor that's not deliberately nerfed. Have a processor that's not horrendously nerfed. And it actually, you know, is decent. Sad. Really, it's just sad. Oh, man. What can I say? All right, when's the Intel... What's the roadmap for Intel 3, which would be 3 nanometer E-type stuff? I just saw something. Intel's foundry bet may split the market in 3. Let's see here. It's from Bloomberg. Terrification. You must... Oh, it's paywalled. I saw something on my phone about this, though. Let's see here. Yeah, they're in a situation where they look up and see the bottom. Intel 3 process will power 5th gen Xeon Emerald Rapids CPUs. It's from January of 2023. 4 nanometer Intel 4, followed by 3 nanometer by the end of the year. Form will form the base 4th gen Meteor Lake processors launch window. i4 for 4 nanometer will focus on power efficiency and die area, optimizing the next gen core lineup. Crap. So yeah, Intel's not going to get to 3 nanometer. What's Intel 5? What's Intel 5? Well, I know they were... So here's the thing. Intel 5 process. Manufacturing. Process. What is Intel 5? Because I noticed when they decided to stop mentioning nanometers, 2019. When they decided to stop mentioning nanometers, they pulled an AMD like from 20 years ago, when AMD was putting numbers on their processors to indicate what Intel chip they would basically... Oh, okay. 7 nanometer in 2021, 5 nanometer in 2023, 3 nanometer in 2025, 2 in 2027, and 1.4 nanometer in 2029, brand new features and backporting. So let's see. So Intel 5 to compete with 5 nanometer was what? Let's see here. 7 nanometer in 2021, 5 nanometer not until this year. So they don't catch up to Intel. They don't catch up to AMD. They don't catch up to AMD. Process technology, That's 10, 7. They don't catch up to AMD until maybe this year. And then whatever round of Intel stuff comes out next. 5 nanometers equivalent to TSMC's 3 nanometer node by the second half of 2024 and product availability in 2025. So that's the thing. Intel fell behind, and that's why they're in the position that they're in. When's this article from? It's from 2019. So it depends on when they can spin up these foundries. And it depends when they can spin up these foundries and actually catch up on manufacturing tech. When they do, though, hopefully, I hope they go back to square processing, but square processors. But I really don't intend on waiting. I really don't intend on waiting until... I don't want to wait years for Intel to catch up to where AMD is now. So with that in mind, I have 2 days scheduled off next week. I went over this whole situation with the AMD Ryzen 7800X3D versus the 5800X3D and decided that the computer stuff that I do is very comprehensive in nature. I do gaming, yes, but it's limited to 1080p on purpose because I don't want to join the rat race of overpaying for gaming hardware to do 4K on a display that will not get any bigger than the 40-inch TV I have right now. So I want to run at native resolution so when I'm outside of games, it'll stay clear. And I won't have to play with scaling my OS too much. I know LCD technology and the way it is. So I decided I want to stay at 1080 native resolution for the foreseeable future, which also means I have less requirements in terms of graphics. I don't have to sink a ton of money to max out games like if someone's going for 4K scaled or 4K native. It's one of the big reasons why I didn't have a problem with a 3060 Ti versus something with more VRAM. Could be the case that games now like Forza Horizon 5 are made for 4K. So if I max out games, like I said, if I max out games, I'm trying to load assets for these games that were made for 4K, which I might not even be able to see on this TV. So that was a problem with Final Fantasy XIV, by the way, when it first came out, was there were textures and other stuff that were way too big to matter, and it killed the performance of the game. Wasn't optimized very well at all. So it wasn't optimized. So I'm going to be smart about this. turn down some probably texture settings to match the 8 gigs of VRAM, even though everybody on the internet's freaking out about it. The graphics card industry is screwing us. No, I think people are just finding out that they're at the find out stage in the FAFO process. And they're finding out right now that there's a lot of price skimming when it comes to technology. It's expensive when it comes out until it matures and becomes cheap. I bought a 1080p TV when it was ahead of the curve in 2008 for $800-something in 2008 money. Factor in the inflation if you want to do the math. Today, a 1080p Samsung, $200-something. The one I have right now, run it in gaming mode all the time to speed up the response speed. $200-something. Versus $300-400-something for 4K. And I might have to do some jumping through hoops when I'm not running games with the Windows OS. So I don't want to scale all the time. So what's the point of going 4K? Especially when I'm staying with the screen size I have right now. Bigger screen? Yeah, sure. But I don't want a situation where I'm like sitting too close to the screen at the movie theater. I already had enough problems at the screen size at World of Warcraft when I lost my mouse pointer on the screen because the screen's too big. It goes outside my field of vision. I actually look around at the screen. So some smart limitations on things here. But with that in mind, 7800X3D, with the limited way that it can flex its muscle, as in you have a $1,000+ 4090 and a very powerful graphics card to actually take advantage of all that Vcache. Most of what I'm looking for really is less CPU overhead when running the game being used up. So I can stream and other stuff. Because let's face it, PC gaming is different than it was when we were like, I got a console killer, it's better than an Xbox. PC gamers usually doing other stuff while playing games, especially grindier games like MMOs. You might have a YouTube video going, you might be streaming, you might be recording video footage for a YouTube video. There's all kinds of things you could be doing. It's not just playing the game anymore. So multi-core, more workstation-y stuff is more important than it was a couple of years ago. PC gaming has changed. I mean, I saw a lot of these changes coming when I built Monolith in 2016. So I've taken 2 days off at work for next week when the Newegg shipment comes in. I will not be replacing Monolith per se. The system I have right now is going to become 2010's Monolith, and it will go into its own case. That is going to be cheaper than the Define R5 that I've been using since 2016. I'm going to clean out the Define R5 and upgrade the hardware, much like I did with Tuxedo when I went from Core 2 Duo to Phenom 2 1090T. So I got many, many years out of that Chenming case, and I intend on doing the same with my Define R5. Plus, I won't have to move as much hardware around if I'm just replacing the motherboard and stuff. Power supply is already in. Just remove the graphics card and put it back in, when everything's installed and stuff. So here's what's next. The next revision of Monolith, I've looked over the whole problems with the burning up X3D CPUs, the problems with AMD getting too niche as they try to compete with Intel, even as Intel is looking at, in a couple of years, no longer needing these rectangular processors because they'll have better manufacturing technology. It will have just taken them a while to catch up to AMD and TSMC. The next revision of Monolith is going to run off of that AMD Ryzen 9 7900, the hippie chip. And I'm going to see how much performance I can squeeze out of a processor with a 65-watt TDP for 12 cores and 24 threads. Maybe I'll run it in turbo mode if I really have to, but I'm really curious, given the competition that desktops face versus laptops and mobile devices for non-gaming regular computing, whether I can have that holy grail system that ramps up and ramps down a little more with a 7900 than I currently do with my Skylake. That all is going to happen next week, Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. So charge up the cameras. We'll be doing stuff. We'll be making videos, and this will be my last stream for quite some time because I'm not going to go out of my way to stream games or chat streaming in the run-up to what's coming up next. This will be in the #1 parking spot for streams for the foreseeable future, and we'll see how this all goes. I'll just say this. I've said enough nice things about the Core i5 13600 here. I've said lots of nice things about the Core i5 of Raptor Lake. If I have any problems like these X3D CPUs, or if the AMD system sucks in any way, this will probably be my last AMD system ever. Corporate America loves Intel for a reason. Reliability and less downtime. So the stakes are very high here. I started out on the AMD side back with the original Athlon. And there have been times when AMD has pulled ahead of Intel when I've supported them, like with the 2005 system and the AMD Athlon 64. Plus, the Athlon XP was pretty good too, even though all the processors were running hot back then. AMD suffered for years. They've clawed their way back into contention, but only rarely have they actually outperformed Intel. And even then, it's for niche cases, like if you care about power efficiency and the like. So, stakes are high. If I have any problems with this rendition of Monolith, it will be my last AMD system, because I am not the kind of guy who likes crazy marketing. It could be the case, you know, that the role of AMD with its Neanderthal marketing and whatnot, the role of AMD with its Neanderthal marketing is to brainwash enough people to buy their stuff, which then is the tail that wags the dog that keeps Intel honest from going back to the stagnant, slow, TikTok, whatever it is, crap, whatever you want to call it, that has been Intel's more stagnant years. Maybe the case. But if we've got a bunch of people that don't... Look, if we have a bunch of people that don't know as much about technology as they think they do, listening to influencers, who, by the way, have to get views to keep their business running, the shortcomings of tech channels like Linus Tech Tips. So, they in a sense, they have to kiss their audience's ass. If they have fanboys, they got to kiss the fanboys' ass. If they do too much of going against the grain, they lose their business. The ultimate conflict of interest for full-time YouTubers and the like. What money does to people. Oh, but Linus is an authority to an extent. If he went too much against the grain, he'd go out of business. Linus Media would be no more. So you got to wonder about that when you watch some of these tech videos that some of these bigger channels are making, especially if they're full-time YouTubers or businesses in the case of Linus Media. But hey, if there's companies out there that are taking advantage of what their own fans and customers don't know about technology, congratulations. You're doing what Apple has been doing for decades. This is not something that the tech world has never seen before. And quite frankly, it's a business model that works. But like we've seen with Mac versus PC, if you know better, you don't buy from the glitz and glimmer company that brainwashes people into thinking their products are always 100% amazing and never have any drawbacks. Whether it's the Mac, the iPhone, or AirPods, or literally anything Apple overcharges people with because they're a boutique brand. If AMD lands in that category, that they make their money off of suckers who will listen to hysteria on the internet, I will very gladly become one of the smart people that benefits from a better Intel because of that customer base and how it affects Big Blue. 10:11 at the Geek House. It's the freaking weekend. I think I should relax and plan this little thing. Hope you've enjoyed the stream, both in the live crowd and after the fact crowd. It will be my last one for quite some time because we've got some stuff to do. Till next time, this is Multimedia J signing off. Thanks for stopping by.